Now that was an occupation of which he had had more than his fill, and since he had been washed and restored to the normal sensations of a clean human being, he found that whatever might be within the scope of his courage, he could not envisage returning to the oar. We have seen the ease with which he had abandoned the religion in which he was reared for the Roman faith, and how utterly deluded he had found himself. With the same degree of ease did he now go over to Islam, and with much greater profit. Moreover, he embraced the religion of Muhammad with a measure of fierce conviction that had been entirely lacking from his earlier apostasy. He had arrived at the conclusion, whilst aboard the galley of Spain, as we have seen, that Christianity as practiced his day was a grim mockery of which the world were better rid. It is not to be supposed that his convictions that Christianity was at fault went the length of making him suppose that Islam was right, or that his conversion to the faith of Muhammad was anything more than superficial. But forced as he was to choose between the rower's bench and the poop deck, the oar and the scimitar, he boldly and resolutely made the only choice that in his case could lead to liberty and life. Thus he was received into the ranks of the faithful whose pavilions wait them in paradise, set in an orchard of never-failing fruit, among rivers of milk, of wine, and of clarified honey. He became the kaya or lieutenant to Yusuf on the galley of that corsair's command, and seconded him in half a score of engagements with an ability and a conspicuity that made him swiftly famous throughout the ranks of the Mediterranean rovers. Some 6 months later, in a fight off the coast of Sicily with one of the galleys of the religion, as the vessels of the Knights of Malta were called, Yusuf was mortally wounded in the very moment of the victory. He died an hour later in the arms of Sir Oliver, naming the latter his successor in the command of the galley, and enjoining upon all implicit obedience to him until they should be returned to Algiers, and the Basha should make known his further will in the matter. The Basha's will was to confirm his nephew's dying appointment of a successor, and Sir Oliver found himself in full command of a galley. From that hour he became Oliver Rees, but very soon his valor and fury earned him the byname of Sakr el-Bahr, the Hawk of the Sea. His fame grew rapidly, and it spread across the tideless sea to the very shores of Christendom. Soon he became Assad's lieutenant, the second in command of all the Algerine galleys, which meant in fact that he was a commander-in-chief, for Assad was growing old and took the sea more and more rarely now. Sakr el-Bahr sallied forth in his name and his stead, and such was his courage, his address, and his good fortune that never did he go forth to return empty-handed. It was clear to all that the favor of Allah was upon him, that he had been singled out by Allah to be the very glory of Islam. Assad, who had ever esteemed him, grew to love him, an intensely devout man. Could he have done less in the case of one for whom the pity and the pitiful showed so marked a predilection? It was freely accepted that when the destiny of Asad ad-Din should come to be fulfilled, Sakr el-Bahr must succeed him in the Bashalik of Algiers, and that thus Oliver Rees would follow in the footsteps of Barbarossa, Ochiali, and other Christian renegades who had become corsair princes of Islam. In spite of certain hostilities which his rapid advancement begot, and of which we shall hear more presently, once only did his power stand in danger of suffering a check. Coming one morning into the reeking bagnio at Algiers, some 6 months after he had been raised to his captaincy, he found there a score of countrymen of his own, and he gave orders that their letters should instantly be struck off and their liberty restored them. Called to account by the Basha for this action, he took a high-handed way, since no other was possible. He swore by the beard of the Prophet that if he were to draw the sword of Muhammad and to serve Islam upon the seas, he would serve it in his own way, and one of his ways was that his own countrymen were to have immunity from the edge of that same sword. Islam, he swore, should not be the loser, since for every Englishman he restored to liberty, he would bring 2 Spaniards, Frenchmen, Greeks, or Italians into bondage. He prevailed, but only upon condition that since captured slaves were the property of the state, if he desired to abstract them from the state, he must first purchase them for himself. Since they would then be his own property, he could dispose of them at his good pleasure. Thus did the wise and just Assad resolve the difficulty which had arisen, and Oliver Rees bowed wisely to that decision. Thereafter, what English slaves were brought to Algiers he purchased manumitted, and found means to send home again. True, it cost him a fine price yearly, but he was fast amassing such wealth as could easily support this tax. As you read Lord Henry Goad's chronicles, you might come to the conclusion that in the whirl of that new life of his Sir Oliver had entirely forgotten the happenings in his Cornish home and the woman he had loved, who so readily had believed him guilty of the slaying of her brother. You might believe this until you come upon a relation of how he found one day among some English seamen brought captive to Algiers by Biscayne el Boric, who had become his own second-in-command, a young Cornish lad from Helston named Pitt, whose father he had known. He took this lad home with him to the fine palace, which he inhabited near the Babel Web, treated him as an honored guest, and sat through a whole summer night in talk with him, questioning him upon this person and that person, and thus gradually drawing from him all the little history of his native place during the 2 years that were sped since he had left it. In this we gather an impression of the wistful longings of fierce nostalgia that must have overcome the renegade and his endeavors to allay it by his endless questions. The Cornish lad had brought him up sharply and agonizingly with that past of his upon which he had closed the door when he became a Muslim and a corsair. The only possible inference is that in those hours of that summer's night repentance stirred in him, and a wild longing to return. Rosamund should reopen for him that door which, hard driven by misfortune, he had slammed. That she would do so when once she knew the truth he had no faintest doubt. And there was now no reason why he should conceal the truth, why he should continue to shield that dastardly half-brother of his, whom he had come to hate as fiercely as he had erstwhile loved him. In secret he composed a long letter giving the history of all that had happened to him since his kidnapping, and setting forth the entire truth of that and of the deed that had led to it. His chronicler opines that it was a letter that must have moved a stone to tears, and, moreover, it was not a mere matter of passionate protestations of innocence, or of unsupported accusation of his brother. It told her the existence of proofs that must dispel all doubt. It told her of that parchment indited by Master Bain and witnessed by the parson, which document was to be delivered to her together with the letter. Further, it bade her seek confirmation of that document's genuineness. Did she doubt it? At the hands of Master Bain himself. That done, it besought her to lay the whole matter before the Queen, and thus secure him faculty to return to England and immunity from any consequences of his subsequent reginade act to which his sufferings had driven him. He loaded the young Cornish man with gifts, gave him that letter to deliver in person, and added instructions that should enable him to find the document he was to deliver with it. That precious parchment had been left between the leaves of an old book on falconry in the library of Pinero, where it would probably be found still undisturbed since his brother would not suspect its presence and was himself no scholar. Pitt was to seek out Nicholas at Pinero and enlist his aid to obtain possession of that document, if it still existed. Then Sakharov Bar found means to conduct Pitt to Genoa, and there put him aboard an English vessel. 3 months later he received an answer, a letter from Pitt, which reached him by way of Genoa, which was at peace with the Algerines, and served then as a channel of communication with Christianity. In this letter Pitt informed him that he had done all that Sir Oliver had desired him, that he had found the document by the help of Nicholas, and that in person he had waited upon Mistress Rosamund Godolphin, who dwelt now with Sir John Killigrew at Arwenack, delivering to her the letter and the parchment, but that upon learning on whose behalf he came, she had in his presence flung both unopened upon the fire, and dismissed him with his tale untold. Sakharov Bar spent the night under the skies in his fragrant orchard, and his slaves reported in terror that they had heard sobs and weeping. If indeed his heart wept, it was for the last time. Thereafter he was more inscrutable, more ruthless, cruel, and mocking than men had ever known him, nor from that day did he ever again concern himself to manumit a single English slave. His heart was become a stone. Thus 5 years passed, counting from that spring night when he was trepanned by Jasper Lee, and his fame spread. His name became a terror upon the seas, and fleets put forth from Malta, from Naples, and from Venice to make an end of him and his ruthless piracy. But Allah kept watch over him, and Sakharov Bar never delivered battle, but he wrested victory to the scimitars of Islam. Then in the spring of that 5th year, there came to him another letter from the Cornish Pitt, a letter which showed him that gratitude was not as dead in the world as he supposed it, for it was purely out of gratitude that the lad whom he had delivered from thraldom wrote to inform him of certain matters that concerned him. This letter reopened that old wound. It did more. It dealt him a fresh one. He learnt from it that the writer had been constrained by Sir John Killigrew to give such evidence of Sir Oliver's conversion to Islam as had enabled the courts to pronounce Sir Oliver as one to be presumed dead at law, granting the succession to his half-brother, Master Lionel Tressilian. Pitt professed himself deeply mortified at having been forced unwittingly to make Sir Oliver so evil return for the benefits received from him, and added that sooner would he have suffered them to hang him than if spoken could he have foreseen the consequences of his testimony. So far Sir Oliver read, unmoved by any feeling other than cold contempt. But there was more to follow. The letter went on to tell him that Mistress Rosamond was newly returned from a 2-year sojourn in France to become betrothed to his half-brother Lionel, and that they were to be wed in June. He was further informed that the marriage had been contrived by Sir John Killigrew in his desire to see Rosamond settled and under protection a husband, since he himself was proposing to take the seas and was fitting out a fine ship for a voyage to the Indies. The writer added that the marriage was widely approved, and it was deemed to be an excellent measure for both houses, since it would weld into one of the two contiguous estates of Penarrow and Godolphin Court. Oliver Reese laughed when he had read thus far. The marriage was approved not for itself, it would seem, but because by means of it 2 stretches of earth were united into one. It was a marriage of 2 parks, of 2 estates, of 2 tracts of arable and forest, and that 2 human beings were concerned in it was apparently no more than an incidental circumstance. Then the irony of it all entered his soul and spread it with bitterness. After dismissing him for the supposed murder of her brother, she was to take the actual murderer to her arms. And he, that cur, that false villain. Out of what depths of hell did he derive the courage to go through with his mummery? Had he no heart, no conscience, no sense of decency, no fear of God? He tore the letter into fragments and set about effacing the matter from his thoughts. Pitt had meant kindly by him, but had dealt cruelly. In his efforts to seek distraction from the torturing images ever in his mind, he took to the sea with 3 galleys, and thus 2 weeks later came face to face with Master Jasper Lee aboard the Spanish carrack, which he captured under Cape Spardell. Chapter 3. Homeward Bound. In the cabin of the captured Spaniard, Jasper Lee found himself that evening face to face with Sakr el Bahr, hailed thither by the corsair's gigantic Nubians. Sakr el Bahr had not yet pronounced his intentions concerning the piratical little skipper, and Master Lee, full conscious that he was a villain, feared the worst, and had spent some miserable hours in the forecastle awaiting a doom which he accounted foregone. Our positions have changed, Master Lee, since last we talked in the ship's cabin, was the renegade's inscrutable greeting. Indeed, Master Lee agreed, but I hope you'll remember that on that occasion I was your friend. At a price, Sakr el Bahr reminded him, and at a price you may find me your friend today. The rascally skipper's heart leapt with hope. Name it, Sir Oliver, he answered eagerly, and so that it lies within my wretched power, I swear I'll never boggle at it. I've had enough of slavery, he ran on in a plaintive whine. 5 years of it, and 4 of them spent aboard the galleys of Spain, and no day in all of them but that I prayed for death. Did you but know what I ha suffered? Never was suffering more merited, never punishment more fitting, never justice more poetic, said Sakr el Bahr in a voice that made the skipper's blood run cold. You would have sold me, a man who did you no hurt, indeed a man who once befriended you. You have sold me into slavery for a matter of 200 pounds. Nay, nay, cried the other fearfully, as God's my witness, 'twas never part of my intent. You'll never forgot the words I spoke to you, the offer that I made to carry you back home again. I at a price, 'tis true, Sakr el Bahr repeated, and it is fortunate for you that you are today in a position to pay a price that should postpone your dirty neck's acquaintance with a rope. I need a navigator, he added in explanation, and what 5 years ago you would have done for 200 pounds, you shall do today for your life. How say you, will you navigate this ship for me? Sir, cried Jasper Lee, who could scarce believe that this was all that was required of him, I'll sail it to hell at your bidding. I am not for Spain this voyage, answered Sakr el Bahr. You shall sail me precisely as you had done 5 years ago, back to Maltafowl, and set me ashore there. Is that agreed? Aye, and gladly, replied Master Lee without a second's pause. The conditions are that you shall have your life and your liberty, Sakr el Bahr explained. But do not suppose that arrived in England you are to be permitted to depart. You must sail us back again, though once you have done that I shall find a way to send you home if you so desire it, and perhaps there will be some measure of reward for you if you serve me faithfully throughout. Follow the habits of a lifetime by playing me false, and there's an end to you. You shall have for constant bodyguard these 2 lilies of the desert. And he pointed to colossal Nubians who stood there invisible almost in the shadow, but for the flash of teeth and eyeballs. They shall watch over you, and see that no harm befalls you so long as you are honest with me, and they shall strangle you at the first sign of treachery. You may go. You have the freedom of the ship, but you are not to leave it here or elsewhere save at my express command." Jasper Lee stumbled out, counting himself fortunate beyond his expectations or deserts, and the Nubians followed him and hung behind him ever after like some vast twin shadow. To Sakro Bar entered Nao Biscayne with a report of the prize captured. Beyond the prisoners, however, in the actual vessel, which had suffered nothing in the fight, the cargo was of no account. Outward bound as she was, it was not to be expected that any treasures would be discovered in her hold. They found great store of armaments and powder, and a little money, but naught else that was worthy of the corsair's attention. Sakro Bar briefly issued his surprising orders. "Thou art to set the captives aboard one of the galleys, Biscayne, and thyself convey them to Algiers, there to be sold. All else thou art to leave aboard here, and 200 picked corsairs to go a voyage with me overseas, men that will act as mariners and fighters. Art thou, then, not returned to Algiers, O Sakro Bar?" "Not yet. I am for a longer voyage. Convey my service to Asad ad-Din, whom Allah guard and cherish, and tell him to look for me in some 6 weeks' time." This sudden resolve of Oliver Reese created no little excitement aboard the galleys. The corsairs knew nothing of navigation upon the open seas. None of them had ever been beyond the Mediterranean. Few of them, indeed, had ever voyaged as far west as Cape Spartel, and it is doubtful if they would have followed any other leader into the perils of the open Atlantic. But Sakro Bar, the child of fortune, the protected of Allah, had never yet led them to aught but victory, and he had but to call him a heel, and they would troop after him whithersoever he should think well to go. So now there was little trouble in finding the 200 Muslimeen he desired for his fighting crew. Rather was the difficulty to keep the number of those eager for the adventure within the bounds he had indicated. You are not to suppose that in all this Sir Oliver was acting upon any preconcerted plan. Whilst he had lain on the heights watching that fine ship beating up against the wind, it had come to him that with such a vessel under him, it were a fond adventure to sail to England, to descend upon that Cornish coast abruptly as a thunderbolt, and present the reckoning to his craven dastard or brother. He had toyed with the fancy, dreamily almost as men build their castles in Spain. Then in the heat of conflict it had entirely escaped his mind, to return the shape of resolve when he came to find himself face to face with Jasper Lee. The skipper and the ship conjointly provided him with all the means to realize that dream he had dreamt. There was none to oppose his will, no reason not to indulge his cruel fancy. Perhaps, too, he might see Rosamund again, might compel her to hear the truth from him. And it was Sir John Killigrew. He had never been able to determine whether Sir John had been his friend or his foe in the past. But since it was Sir John who had been instrumental in setting up Lionel in Sir Oliver's place, by inducing the courts to presume Sir Oliver's death on the score that being a renegade, he must be accounted dead at law. And since it was Sir John who was contriving this wedding between Lionel and Rosamund, why, Sir John, too, should be paid a visit, and should be informed of the precise nature of the thing he did, with the forces at his disposal in those days of his absolute lordship of life and death along the African littoral. To conceive was with Oliver Reese no more than the prelude to execution. The habit of swift realization of his every wish had grown with him, and that habit guided now his course. He made his preparations quickly, and on the morrow the Spanish carrack, lately labeled Nuestra Senora de las Lagas, but with that label carefully effaced from her quarter, trimmed her sails and stood out for the open Atlantic, navigated by Captain Jasper Lee. The 3 galleys under the command of Biscayne Boric crept slowly eastward and homeward to Algiers, hugging the coast, as was the corsair habit. The wind favored Oliver so well that within 10 days of rounding Cape St. Vincent, he had his first glimpse of the Lizard. Chapter 4. The Raid. In the estuary of the river foul a splendid ship, on the building of which the most cunning engineers had been employed and no money spared, rode proudly at anchor just off Smithick under the very shadow of the heights crowned by the fine house of Arwenack. She was fitting out for a distant voyage, and for days the work of bringing stores and munitions aboard had been in progress, so that there was an unwonted bustle about the little forge and the huddle of cottages that went to make up the fishing village, as if in earnest of the great traffic that in future days was to be seen about that spot. For Sir John Killigrew seemed at last to be on the eve of prevailing, and of laying the foundations of the fine port of his dreams. To this state of things his friendship with Master Lionel Tressilian had contributed not a little. The opposition made to his project by Sir Oliver and supported, largely at Sir Oliver's suggestion, by Truro and Helston, had been entirely withdrawn by Lionel. More, indeed, Lionel had actually gone so far in the opposite direction as to support Sir John in his representations to Parliament and the Queen. It followed naturally enough that just as Sir Oliver's opposition to that cherished project had been the seed of the hostility between Arwenack and Penarrow, so Lionel's support of it became the root of the staunch friendship that sprang up between himself and Sir John. What Lionel lacked of his brother's keen intelligence, he made up for in cunning. He realized that although at some future time it was possible that Helston and Truro and the Tressilian property there might come to suffer as a consequence of the development of a port so much more advantageously situated, yet that could not be in his own lifetime, and meanwhile he must earn in return Sir John's support for his suit of Rosamund Godolphin, and thus find the Godolphin estates merged with his own. This certain immediate gain was to master Lionel well worth the other future possible loss. It must not, however, be supposed that Lionel's courtship had thenceforward run a smooth and easy course. The mistress of Godolphin Court showed him no favor, and it was mainly that she might abstract herself from the importunities of his suit that she had sought and obtained Sir John Killigrew's permission to accompany the latter's sister to France when she went there with her husband, who was appointed English ambassador to the Louvre. Sir John's authority as her guardian had come into force with the decease of her brother. Master Lionel moped a while in her absence, but cheered by Sir John's assurance that in the end he should prevail, he quitted Cornwall in his turn, and went forth to see the world. He spent some time in London about the court, where, however, he seems to have prospered little, and then he crossed to France to pay his devoirs to the lady of his longings. His constancy, the humility with which he made his suit, the obvious intensity of his devotion, began at last to wear away that gentlewoman's opposition, as dripping water wears away a stone. Yet she could not bring herself to forget that he was Sir Oliver's brother, the brother of the man she had loved, and the brother of the man who had killed her own brother. Between them stood, then, two things: the ghost of that old love of hers, and the blood of Peter Godolphin. Of this she reminded Sir John on her return to Cornwall after an absence of some 2 years, urging these matters as reasons why an alliance between herself and Lionel Tressilian must be impossible. Sir John did not at all agree with her. "My dear," he said, "there is your future to be thought of. You are now of full age and mistress of your own actions. Yet it is not well for a woman and a gentlewoman to dwell alone. As long as I live, or as long as I remain in England, all will be well. You may continue indefinitely your residence here at Arwenack, and you have been wise, I think, in quitting the loneliness of Godolphin Court. Yet consider that loneliness may be yours again when I am not here. I should prefer that loneliness to the company you would thrust upon me." She answered him. "Ungracious speech," he protested. "Is this your gratitude for that lad's burning devotion, for his patience, his gentleness, and all the rest?" "He is Oliver Tressilian's brother," she replied. "And has he not suffered enough of that already? Is there to be no end to the price that he must pay for his brother's sins? Besides, consider that when all is said they are not even brothers. They are but half-brothers. Yet too closely kin," she said. "If you must have me, would I beg you'll find me another husband." To this he would answer that expediently considered no husband could be better than the one he had chosen her. He pointed out the contiguity of their two estates, and how fine and advantageous a thing it would be to merge these two into one. He was persistent, and his persistence was increased when he came to conceive his notion to take the seas again. His conscience would not permit him to heave anchor until he bestowed her safely in wedlock. Lionel, too, was persistent, in a quiet, almost self-effacing way that never set a strain upon her patience, and was therefore the more difficult to combat. In the end, she gave way under the pressure of these men's wills, and did so with the best grace she could summon, resolved to drive from her heart and mind the one real obstacle which, for very shame, she had made no mention to Sir John. The fact is that in spite of all, her love for Sir Oliver was not dead. It was stricken down, it is true, until she herself failed to recognize it for what it really was. But she caught herself thinking of him frequently and wistfully. She found herself comparing him with his brother, and for all that she had been Sir John, find her some other husband than Lionel. She knew full well that any suitor brought before her must be submitted to that same comparison to his inevitable undoing. All this she accounted evil in herself. It was in vain that she lashed her mind with a reminder that Sir Oliver was Peter's murderer. As time went on, she found herself actually making excuses for her sometime lover. She would admit that Peter had driven him to the step, that for her sake Sir Oliver had suffered insult upon insult from Peter, until, being but human, the cup of his endurance had overflowed in the end, and weary of submitting to the other's blows, he had risen up in his anger and smitten in his turn. She would scorn herself for such thoughts as these, yet she could not dismiss them. In act she could be strong, as witness how she had dealt with that letter which Oliver sent her out of Barbary by the hand of Pitt. But her thoughts she could not govern, and her thoughts were full often traitors to her will. There were longings in her heart for Oliver which she could not stifle, and there was ever the hope that he would one day return, although she realized that from such a return she might look for nothing. When Sir John finally slew the hope of that return, he did a wiser thing than he conceived. Never since Oliver's disappearance had they heard any news of him until Pitt came at Arwenack with that letter and his story. They had heard, as had all the world, of the corsair Sakharov Bar, but they had been far indeed from connecting him with Oliver Tressilian. Now that his identity was established by Pitt's testimony, it was an easy matter to induce the courts to account him dead and to give Lionel the coveted inheritance. This to Rosamund was a small matter, but a great one was that Sir Oliver was dead at law, and must be so in fact, should he ever again set foot in England. It extinguished finally that curiously hopeless and almost subconscious hope of hers that one day he would return. Thus it helped her perhaps to face and accept the future which Sir John was resolved to thrust upon her. Her betrothal was made public, and she proved, if not an ardently loving, at least a docile and gentle mistress to Lionel. He was content. He could ask no more in reason at the moment, and he was buoyed up by every lover's confidence that given opportunity and time, he could find the way to awaken a response. And it must be confessed that already during their betrothal, he gave some proof of his reason for his confidence. She had been lonely, and he dispelled her loneliness by his complete surrender of himself to her. His restraint and his cautious, almost insidious creeping along a path which a more clumsy fellow would have taken at a dash made companionship possible between them and very sweet to her. Upon this foundation her affection began gradually to rise, and seeing them together and such excellent friends, Sir John congratulated himself upon his wisdom and went about the fitting out of that fine ship of his, the Silver Heron, for the coming voyage. Thus they came within a week of the wedding, and Sir John all impatience now. The marriage bells were to be a signal for departure. As they fell silent, the Silver Heron should spread her wings. It was the evening of the 1st of June. The peal of the curfew had faded on the air, and lights were being set in the great dining room at Arwenack, where the company was to sup. It was a small party. Just Sir John and Rosamund and Lionel, who had lingered on that day, and Lord Henry Goade, our chronicler, the Queen's Lieutenant of Cornwall, together with his lady. They were visiting Sir John, and they were to remain yet a week as guests at Arwenack that they might grace the coming nuptials. Above in the house there was great stir of preparation for the departure of Sir John and his ward, the latter into wedlock, the former into unknown seas. In the turret chamber a dozen sempstresses were at work upon the bridal outfit under the directions of that Sally Pentreath, who had been no less assiduous in the preparation of swaddling clothes and the like on the eve of Rosamund's appearance in this world. At the very hour at which Sir John was leading his company to table, Sir Oliver Tressilian was setting foot ashore not a mile away. He had deemed it wiser not to round Pendennis Point. So in the bay above Swamppool on the western side of that promontory, he had dropped anchor as the evening shadows were deepening. He had launched the ship's 2 boats, and in these he conveyed some 30 of his men ashore. Twice had the boats returned, until 100 of his corsairs stood ranged along that foreign beach. The other 100 he left on guard aboard. He took so great a force upon an expedition for which a quarter of the men would have sufficed, so as to ensure by overwhelming numbers the avoidance of all unnecessary violence. Absolutely unobserved, he led them up the slope towards Arwenack through the darkness that had now closed in. To tread his native soil once more went near to drawing tears from him. How familiar was the path he followed with such confidence in the night! How well known each bush and stone by which he went with his silent multitude hard upon his heels! Who could have foretold him such a return as this? Who could have dreamt when he roamed amain in his youth here with dogs and fowling piece, that he would creep one night over these dunes a renegade Muslim, leading a horde of infidels to storm the house of Sir John Killigrew of Arwenack? Such thoughts begot a weakness in him, But he made a quick recovery when his mind swung to all that he had so unjustly suffered, when he considered all that he came thus to avenge. First to Arwenack to Sir John and Rosamund to compel them to hear the truth at least, and then away to Penarrow for Master Lionel and the reckoning. Such was the project that warmed him, conquered his weakness, and spurred him, relentless, onward and upward to heights and the fortified house that dominated them. He found the massive iron-studded gates locked, as was to have been expected at that hour. He knocked, and presently the postern gaped, and a lantern was advanced. Instantly that lantern was dashed aside, and Sir Oliver had leapt over the sill into the courtyard, with a hand gripping the porter's throat to choke all utterance. Sir Oliver heaved him out to his men, who swiftly gagged him. That done, they poured silently through that black gap of the postern into the spacious gateway. On he led them, at a run almost, toward the tall mullioned windows, whence a flood of golden light seemed invitingly to beckon them. With the servants who met them in the hall, they dealt in the same swift, silent fashion as they had dealt with the gatekeeper, and such was the speed and caution of their movements that Sir John and his company had no suspicion of their presence until the door of the dining-room crashed open before their eyes. The sight which they beheld was one that for some moments left them amazed and bewildered. Lord Henry tells us how at first he imagined that here was some mummery, some surprise prepared for bridal couple by Sir John's tenants or the folk of Smithick and Pennycumwick, and he adds that he was encouraged in this belief by the circumstance that not a single weapon gleamed in all the horde of outlandish intruders. Although they came full armed against any eventualities, yet by their leader's orders not a blade was bared. What was to do was to be done with their naked hands alone and without bloodshed. Such were the orders of Sakr el Bahr, and Sakr el Bahr's were not orders to be disregarded. Himself he stood forward at the head of that legion of brown-skinned men arrayed in all the colors of the rainbow, their heads swayed in turbans of every hue. He considered the company in grim silence, and the company in amazement considered this turbaned giant with a masterful face that was tanned to the color of mahogany, the black forked beard, and those singularly light eyes glittering like steel under his black brows. Thus a little while in silence. Then with a sudden gasp, Lionel Tressilian sank back in his tall chair, as if bereft of strength. The agate eyes flashed upon him, smiling cruelly. "I see that you at least recognize me," said Sakr el Bahr in his deep voice. "I was assured I could depend upon the eyes of brotherly love to pierce the change that time and stress have wrought in me." Sir John was on his feet, his lean, swarthy face flushing darkly, an oath on his lips. Rosamund sat on as if frozen with horror, considering Sir Oliver with dilating eyes, whilst her hands clawed the table before her. They too recognized him now, and realized that here was no mummery. That something sinister was intended Sir John could not for a moment doubt. But of what that something might be, he could form no notion. It was the first time that Barbary rovers were seen in England. That famous raid of theirs upon Baltimore and Ireland did not take place until some 30 years after this date. Sir Oliver Tressilian. Killigrew gasped, and Sir Oliver Tressilian echoed Lord Henry Goade to add, "By God." "Not Sir Oliver Tressilian," came the answer, "but Sakr el Bahr, the scourge of the sea, the terror of Christendom, the desperate corsair lies, cupidity, and false-heartedness have fashioned out of the sometime Cornish gentleman." He embraced them all in his denunciatory gesture. "Behold me here with my Seahawks, to present a reckoning long overdue," writing now what his own eyes beheld. Lord Henry tells us how Sir John leapt to snatch a weapon from the armored walls, how Sakr el Bahr barked out a single word in Arabic, and how at that word a half-dozen of his supple blackamoors sprang upon the knight like greyhounds upon a hare and bore him writhing to the ground. Lady Henry screamed. Her husband does not appear to have done anything, or else modesty keeps him silent on the score of it. Rosamund, white to the lips, continued to look on, whilst Lionel, overcome, covered his face with his hands in sheer horror. One and all of them expected to see some ghastly deed of blood performed there, coldly and callously as the wringing of a capon's neck. But no such thing took place. The corsairs merely turned Sir John upon his face, dragged his wrists behind him to make them fast, and having performed that duty with a speedy, silent dexterity, they abandoned him. Sakr el Bahr watched their performance with those grimly smiling eyes of his. When it was done, he spoke again and pointed to Lionel, who leapt up in sudden terror, with a cry that was entirely inarticulate. Lithe brown arms encircled him like a legion of snakes. Powerless, he was lifted in the air and borne swiftly away. For an instant he found himself held face to face with his turbaned brother. Into that pallid, terror-stricken human mask, the renegade's eyes stabbed like two daggers. Then deliberately, and after the fashion of the Muslim, he spat upon it. "Away!" he growled, and through the press of corsairs that thronged the hall behind him, the lane was swiftly opened, and Lionel was swallowed up, lost to the view of those within the room. "What murderous deed do you intend?" cried Sir John indomitably. He had risen and stood grimly dignified in his bonds. "Will you murder your own brother as you murdered mine?" demanded Rosamund, speaking now for the first time, and rising as she spoke, a faint flush coming to overspread her pallor. She saw him wince. She saw the mocking, lustful anger perish his face, leaving it vacant for a moment. Then it became grim again with a fresh resolve. Her words had altered all the current of his intentions. They fixed in him a dull, fierce rage. They silenced the explanations which he was come to offer, and which he scorned to offer here after that taunt. "It seems you love that thing that was my brother," he said, sneering. "I wonder will you love him still when you come to be better acquainted with him? Though, faith, naught would surprise me in a woman and her love. Yet I am curious to see. He laughed. "I have a mind to gratify myself. I will not separate you, not just yet." He advanced upon her. "Come thou with me, lady," he commanded, and held out his hand. And now Lord Henry seems to have been stirred to futile action. "At that," he writes, "I thrust myself between to shield her. 'Thou dog,' I cried, 'thou shalt be made to suffer.' 'Suffer?' quoth he, and mocked me with his deep laugh. 'I have suffered already. 'Tis for that reason I am here. And thou shalt suffer again, thou pyre out of hell.' I warned him. 'Thou shalt suffer for this outrage, as God's my life.' 'Shall I so?' quoth he, very calm and sinister. 'And at whose hands, I pray you?' 'At mine, sir,' I roared, being by now stirred to a great fury. 'At thine,' he sneered. 'Thou loyalty hunt the hawk of the sea? Thou plum partridge. Away, hinder me not.' And he adds that again Sir Oliver spoke that short Arabic command, whereupon a dozen blackamoors whirled the Queen's lieutenant aside and bound him to a chair. Face to face stood now Sir Oliver with Rosamund, face to face after 5 long years, and he realized that in every moment of that time the certainty had never departed from him of some such future meeting. "Come, lady," he bade her sternly. A moment she looked at him with hate and loathing in the clear depths of her deep blue eyes. Then swiftly as lightning, she snatched a knife from the board and drove it at his heart. But his hand moved as swiftly to seize her wrist, and the knife clattered to the ground, its errand unfulfilled. A shuddering sob escaped her then to express at once her horror of her own attempt and of the man who held her. That horror mounting until it overpowered her, she sank suddenly against him in a swoon. Instinctively his arms went round her, and a moment he held her thus, recalling the last occasion on which he had lain against his breast, on an evening 5 years and more ago under the grey wall of Godolphin Court above the river. What prophet could have told him that when next he so held her the conditions would be these? It was all grotesque and incredible, like the fantastic dream of some sick mind. But it was all true, and she was in his arms again. He shifted his grip to her waist, heaved her to his mighty shoulder, as though she were a sack of grain, and swung about, his business at Arwenack accomplished. Indeed, more of it accomplished than had been his intent, and also something less. "Away, away!" he cried to his rovers, and away they sped as fleetly and silently as they had come, no man raising now so much as a voice to hinder them. Through the hall and across the courtyard flowed that human tide. Out into the open and along the crest of the hill it surged. Then away down the slope toward the beach where their boats awaited them. Sakr el Bahr ran as lightly as though the swooning woman he bore were no more than a cloak he had flung across his shoulder. Ahead of him went a half-dozen of his fellows, carrying his gagged and pinioned brother. Once only before they dipped from the heights of Arwenack did Oliver check. He paused to look across the dark, shimmering water to the woods that screened the house of Pinero from his view. It had been part of his purpose to visit it, as we know, but the necessity had now been removed, and he was conscious of a pang of disappointment, of a hunger to look again upon his home. But to shift the current of his thoughts just then came 2 of his officers, Othmani and Ali, who had been muttering one with the other. As they overtook him, Othmani set now a hand upon his arm, and pointed down towards the twinkling lights of Smithick and Penycumwick. "My lord," he cried, "there will be lads and maidens there should fetch fat prices in the Sakha Labid." "No doubt," said Sakr el-Bahr, scarce heeding him, heeding indeed little in this world but his longings to look upon Penarrow. "Why, then, my lord, shall I take 50 true believers and make a raid upon them? It were an easy task, all unsuspicious, as they must be of our presence." Sakr el-Bahr came out of his musings. "Othmani," said he, "art a fool, the very father of fools. Else wouldst thou come and know by now that those who once were of my own race, those of the land from which I am sprung, are sacred to me. Here we take no slave, but these we have. And then in the name of Allah." But Othmani was not yet silenced. "And is our perilous voyage across these unknown seas into this far heathen land to be rewarded by no more than just these 2 captives? Is that a raid worthy of Sakr el-Bahr?" "Leave Sakr el-Bahr to judge," was the curt answer. "But reflect, my lord, there is another who will judge. How shall our Basha, the glorious Asad-ed-Din, welcome thy return with such poor spoils as these? What questions will he set thee, and what account shalt thou render him for having imperiled the lives of all these true believers upon the seas for so little profit? He shall ask me what he pleases, and I shall answer what I please, and as Allah prompts me. On I say." And on they went, Sakr el-Bahr conscious now of little but the warmth of that body upon his shoulder, and knowing not, so tumultuous were his emotions, whether it fired him to love or hate. They gained the beach. They reached a ship whose very presence had continued unsuspected. The breeze was fresh, and they stood away at once. By sunrise there was no more sign of them than there had been at sunset. There was no more clue to the way they had taken than to the way they had come. It was as if they had dropped from the skies in the night upon that Cornish coast, and but for the mark of their swift, silent passage, but for the absence of Rosamund and Lionel Tressilian, the thing must have been accounted no more than a dream of those few who had witnessed it, aboard the Carrack. Sakr el-Bahr bestowed Rosamund in the cabin over the quarter, taking the precaution to lock the door that led to the stern gallery. Lionel he ordered to be dropped into a dark hole under the hatchway, there to lie and meditate upon the retribution that had overtaken him until such time as his brother should have determined upon his fate, for this was a matter upon which the renegade was still undecided. Himself he lay under the stars at night, and thought of many things. One of these things, which plays some part in the story, though it is probable that it played but a slight one in his thoughts, was begotten of the words Othmani had used. What, indeed, would be Assad's welcome of him on his return if he sailed into Algiers with nothing more to show for that long voyage and the imperiling of the lives of 200 true believers than just those 2 captives whom he intended, moreover, to retain for himself? What capital would not be made out of that circumstance by his enemies in Algiers, and by Assad's Sicilian wife, who hated him with all the bitterness of a hatred that had its roots in the fertile soil of jealousy? This may have spurred him to cool dawn to a very daring and desperate enterprise, which destiny sent his way in the shape of a tall-masted Dutchman homeward bound. He gave chase, for all that he was full conscious that the battle he invited was one of which his corsairs had no experience, and one upon which they must have hesitated to venture with another leader than himself. But the star of Sakr el-Bahr was a star that never led to aught but victory, and their belief in him, the very javelin of Allah, overcame any doubts that may have been begotten of finding themselves upon an unfamiliar craft and on a rolling, unfamiliar sea. This fight is given in great detail by my Lord Henry from the particulars afforded him by Jasper Lee, but it differs in no great particular from other sea fights, and it is none of my purpose to surfeit you with such recitals. Enough to say that it was stern and fierce, entailing great loss to both combatants. That cannon played little part in it, for knowing the quality of his men, Sakr el-Bahr made haste to run in and grapple. He prevailed, of course, as he must ever prevail by the very force of his personality and the might of his example. He was the first to leap aboard the Dutchman, clad in mail and whirling his great scimitar, and his men poured after him shouting his name and that of Allah in a breath. Such was ever his fury in an engagement that it infected and inspired his followers. It did so now, and the shrewd Dutchman came to perceive that this heathen horde was as a body to which he supplied the brain and soul. They attacked him fiercely in groups, intent at all costs upon cutting him down. convinced almost by instinct that where he felt the victory would easily be theirs. And in the end, they succeeded. A Dutch pike broke some links of his mail and dealt him a flesh wound, which went unheeded by him in his fury. A Dutch rapier found the breach thus made in his defenses, and went through it to stretch him bleeding upon the deck. Yet he staggered up, knowing as full as did they that if he succumbed then all was lost. Armed now with a short axe which he had found under his hand when he went down, he hacked away to the bulwarks, set his back against the timbers, and hoarse of voice, ghastly of face, spattered with the blood of his wound, he urged on his men until the victory was theirs. And this was fortunately soon. And then, as if he had been sustained by no more than the very force of his will, he sank down in a heap among the dead and wounded huddled against the vessel's bulwarks. Grief-stricken, his corsairs bore him back aboard the carrack. Where he had died, then was their victory, a barren one indeed. They lay him on a couch prepared for him amidships on the main deck, where the vessel's pitching was least discomfiting. A Moorish surgeon came attend him, and pronounced his hurt a grievous one, but not so grievous as to close the gates of hope. This pronouncement gave the corsairs all the assurance they required. It could not be that the gardener could already pluck so fragrant a fruit from Allah's garden. The pitiful must spare Sakr el-Bahr to continue the glory of Islam. Yet they were come to the Straits of Gibraltar before his fever abated, and he recovered complete consciousness, to learn of the final issue of that hazardous fight into which he led those children of the Prophet. The Dutchman, Othmani informed him, was following in their wake, with Ali and some others aboard her, steering ever in the wake of the carrack, which continued to be navigated by the Nasrani dog, Jasper Lee. When Sakr el-Bahr learnt the value of the capture, when he was informed that in addition to 100 able-bodied men under the hatches, to be sold as slaves in the Sakr el-Abid, there was a cargo of gold and silver, pearls, amber, spices, and ivory, and such lesser matters as gorgeous silken fabrics, rich beyond anything that had ever been seen upon the seas at any one time. He felt that the blood he had shed had not been wasted. Let him sail safely into Algiers with these 2 ships, both captured in the name of Allah and his Prophet, one of them an argosy so richly fraught, a floating treasure house, and he need have little fear what his enemies and the crafty evil Sicilian woman might have wrought against him in his absence. Then he made inquiry touching his 2 English captives, to be informed that Othmani had taken charge of them, and that he had continued the treatment meted out to them by Sakr el-Bahr himself when first they were brought aboard. He was satisfied, and fell into a gentle healing sleep, whilst on the decks above, his followers rendered thanks to Allah, the pitying the pitiful, the master of the day of judgment, who alone is all-wise, all-knowing. Chapter 5. The Lion of the Faith. Asad ad-Din, the Lion of the Faith, Bash of Algiers, walked in the evening cool in the orchard of the Casbah upon the heights above the city, and at his side, stepping daintily, came Fenzili, his wife, the first lady of his harem, whom 18 years ago he had carried off in his mighty arms from that little whitewashed village above the Straits of Messina, which his followers had raided. She had been a lissom maid of 16 in those far-off days, the child of humble peasant folk, and she had gone uncomplaining to the arms of her swarthy ravisher. Today, at 34, she was still beautiful, more beautiful indeed than when first she had fired the passion of Asad Rees, as he then was one of the captains of the famous Ali Basha. There were streaks of red in her heavy black tresses. Her skin was a soft pearliness that seemed translucent. Her eyes were large, of a golden brown, agleam with somber fires. Her lips were full and sensuous. She was tall in a shape that in Europe would have been accounted perfect, which is to say that she was a thought too slender for Oriental taste. She moved along beside her lord with sinuous, languorous grace, gently stirring her fan of ostrich plumes. She was unveiled. Indeed, it was her immodest habit to go naked of face more often than was seemly, which is but the least of the many undesirable infidel ways which had survived her induction into the faith of Islam, a necessary step before Saad, who was devout to the point of bigotry, would consent to make her his wife. He had found her such a wife as it is certain he could never have procured at home, a woman who, not content to be his toy, the plaything of his idle hour, insinuated herself into affairs, demanded and obtained his confidences, and exerted over him much the same influence as the wife of a European prince might exert over her consort. In the years during which he had lain under the spell of her ripening beauty, he had accepted the situation willingly enough. Later, when he would have curtailed her interferences, it was too late. She had taken a firm grip of the reins, and Assad was in no better case than many a European husband. An anomalous and outrageous condition this for a Basha of the Prophet's house. It was also a dangerous one for Fenzli, for should the burden of her at any time become too heavy for her lord, there was a short and easy way by which he could be rid of it. Do not suppose her so foolish as not to have realized this. She realized it fully, but her Sicilian spirit was daring to the point of recklessness. Her very dauntlessness, which had enabled her to seize control so unprecedented in a Muslim wife, urged her to maintain it in the face of all risks. Dauntless was she now, as she paced there in the cool of the orchard, under the pink and white petals of the apricots, the flaming scarlet of pomegranate blossoms, and through orange groves where the golden fruit glowed, and amid foliage of somber green. She was at her eternal work of poisoning the mind of her lord against Sakhr el-Bahr, and in her maternal jealousy, she braved the dangers of such an undertaking. Fully aware of how dear to the heart of Asad ad-Din was that absent renegade corsair. It was his very affection of the Basha's for his lieutenant that was the foment of her own hate of Sakhr el-Bahr, for it was an affection that transcended Assad's love for his own son and hers, and it led to the common rumor that for Sakhr el-Bahr was reserved the high destiny of succeeding Assad in the Bashalik. I tell thee thou art abused by him, O source of my life. I hear thee, answered Assad sourly, and were thine own hearing less infirm, woman, thou wouldst have heard me answer thee, that thy words weigh for naught with me against his deeds. Words may be but a mask upon our thoughts. Deeds are ever the expression of them. Bear thou that in mind, O Fenzli. Do I not bear in mind thine every word, O fount of wisdom? She protested and left him, as she often did, in doubt whether she fawned or sneered. And it is his deeds I would have speak for him, not indeed my poor words, and still less his own. Then, by the head of Allah, let those same deeds speak, and be thou silent. The harsh tone of his reproof and the scowl upon his haughty face gave her pause for a moment. He turned about. Come, he said, soon it will be the hour of prayer. And he paced back towards the yellow huddled walls of the Kasbah that overtopped the green of that fragrant place. He was a tall, gaunt man, stooping slightly at the shoulders under the burden of his years. But his eagle face was masterful, and some lingering embers of his youth still glowed in his dark eyes. Thoughtfully, with a jeweled hand, he stroked his long white beard. With the other he leaned upon her soft, plump arm, more from habit than for support, for he was full vigorous still. High in the blue overhead a lark burst suddenly into song, and from the depth of the orchard came a gentle murmur of doves, as if returning thanks for the lessening of the great heat now that the sun was sinking rapidly towards the world's edge and the shadows were lengthening. Came Fenzlia's voice again, more musical than either, yet laden with words of evil, poison wrapped in honey. O my dear lord, thou art angry with me now. Woe me, that never may I counsel thee for thine own glory as my heart prompts me, but I must earn thy coldness. Abuse not of my love, said the Basha shortly. I have told thee so full oft already. She nestled closer to him, and her voice grew softer, more akin to the amorous cooing of the doves. And do I not love thee, O master of my soul? Is there in all the world a heart more faithful to thee than mine? Is not thy life my life? Have not my days been all devoted to the perfecting of thine happiness? And wilt thou then frown upon me, if I fear for thee at the hands of an intruder of yesterday? Fear for me? He echoed, and laughed jeeringly. What shouldst thou fear for me from Sakhr el-Bahr? What all believers must ever fear from one who is no true Muslim, from one who makes a mock and travesty of the true faith, that he may gain advancement. The Basha checked in his stride, and turned upon her angrily. May thy tongue rot, thou mother of lies. I am as the dust beneath thy feet, O my sweet lord, yet am I not what thine heedless anger calls me. Heedless, quoth he, not heedless, but righteous to hear one whom the prophet guards, who is the very javelin of Islam against the breast of the unbeliever, who carries the scourge of Allah against the infidel Frankish pigs, so maligned by thee. No more, I say, lest I bid thee make good thy words, and pay the liar's price if thou shouldst fail. And should I fear the test? She countered, nothing daunted. I tell thee, O father Marzak, that I should hail it gladly. Why, hear me now. Thou settest store by deeds, not words. Tell me, then, is it the deed of a true believer to waste substance upon infidel slaves, to purchase them that he may set them free? Assad moved on in silence. That erstwhile habit of soccerel bars was one not easy to condone. It had occasioned him his moments of uneasiness, and more than once had he taxed his lieutenant with the practice ever to receive the same answer, the answer which he now made to Fenzeli. For every slave that he so manumitted, he brought a dozen into bondage, perforce, else would he be called to account. 'Twas so much dust he flung into the face of true Muslimeen. Those manumissions prove a lingering fondness for the infidel country whence he springs. Is there room for that in the heart of a true member of the Prophet's immortal house? Hast ever known me languish the Sicilian shore from which I might thou wrested me? Or have I ever besought thee the life of a single Sicilian infidel in all these years that I have lived to serve thee? Such longings are betrayed, I say, by such a practice, and such longings could have no place in one who had uprooted infidelity from his heart. And now this voyage of his beyond the seas, risking a vessel that he captured from the archenemy of Islam, which is not his to risk, but thine in whose name he captured it, and together with it he imperils the lives of 200 true believers. To what end? To bear him overseas, perchance that he may look again upon the unhallowed land that gave him birth. So Biscayne reported. And what if he should founder on the way? Thou at least wouldst be content. Thou found a malice, growled Asad. Call me harsh names, O sun that warms me. Am I not thine to use and abuse at thy sweet pleasure? Pour salt upon the heart thou woundest. Since it is thy hand, I'll never murmur complaint. But heed me, heed my words, or since words are of no account with thee, then heed his deeds which I am drawing to thy tardy notice. Heed them, I say, as my love bids me, even though thou shouldst give me be whipped or slain for my temerity. Woman, thy tongue is like the clapper of a bell with the devil swinging from a rope. What else dost thou impute? Naught else. Since thou dost but mock me, withdraw thy love from thy fond slave. The praise to Allah, then, said he. Come, it is the hour of prayer. But he praised Allah too soon. Womanlike, though she protested she had done, she had scarce begun as yet. There is thy son, O father of Marzak. There is, O mother of Marzak. And a man's son should be the partner of his soul. Yet is Marzak passed over for this foreign upstart. Yet does this Nasrani of yesterday hold the place in thy heart, and at thy side that should be Marzak's. Could Marzak fill that place, he asked. Could that beardless boy lead men as Sakrobar leads them, or wield the scimitar against the foes of Islam, and increase as Sakrobar increases the glory of the Prophet's holy law upon the earth? If Sakrobar does this, he does it by thy favor, O my lord. And so might Marzak, young though he be, Sakrobar is but what thou hast made him, no more, no less. There art thou wrong, indeed, O mother of error. Sakrobar is what Allah hath made him. He is what Allah wills. He shall become what Allah wills. Hast yet to learn that Allah is bound the fate of each man about his neck. And then a golden glory suffused the deep sapphire of the sky, heralding the setting of the sun, and made an end of that altercation. Conducted by her with a daring as singular as the patience that had endured it, he quickened his steps in the direction of the courtyard. That golden glow paled as swiftly as it had spread, and night fell as suddenly as if a curtain had been dropped. In the purple gloom that followed the white cloisters of the courtyard glowed with a faintly luminous pearliness. Dark forms of slaves stirred as Asad entered from the garden, followed by Fenzeli, her head now veiled in a thin blue silken gauze. She flashed across the quadrangle and vanished through one of the archways, even as the distant voice of a mueddin broke plaintively upon the brooding stillness, reciting the Shihad. La ilaha illa Allah, wa Muhammad Rasul Allah. A slave spread a carpet. A second held a great silver bowl, into which a third poured water. The Basha, having washed, turned his face towards Mecca and testified to the unity of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful, King of the Day of Judgment, whilst the cry of the mueddin went echoing over the city from minaret to minaret. As he rose from his devotions, there came a quick sound of steps without and a sharp summons. Turkish janissaries of the Basha's guard, invisible almost in their flowing black garments, moved to answer that summons and challenge those who came. From the dark vaulted entrance of the courtyard leapt a gleam of lanterns containing tiny clay lamps in which burned a wick that was nourished by mutton fat. Asad, waiting to learn who came, halted at the foot of the white glistening steps. whilst from doors and lattices of the palace flooded light to suffuse the courtyard and set the marbles shimmering. A dozen Euboean javelin men advanced, then ranged themselves aside, whilst into the light stepped the imposing, gorgeously robed figure of Assad's Wazir, Tsammani. After him came another figure in mail that clanked faintly and glimmered as he moved. "Peace and the Prophet's blessings upon thee, O mighty Assad," was the Wazir's greeting. "And peace upon thee, Tsammani," was the answer. "Art the bearer of news?" "Of great and glorious tidings. O exalted one, Sakhr-el-Bahr is returned." "The praise to him!" exclaimed the Basha with uplifted hands, and there was no mistaking the thrill of his voice. There fell a soft step behind him and a shadow from the doorway. He turned. A graceful stripling in turban and caftan of cloth of gold salaamed to him from the topmost step, and as he came upright and the light of the lanterns fell full upon his face, the astonishingly white fairness of it was revealed. A woman's face it might have been, so softly rounded was it in its beardlessness. Assad smiled wryly in his white beard, guessing that the boy had been sent by his ever-watchful mother to learn who came and what the tidings that they bore. "Thou hast heard, Marzak," he said. "Sakhr-el-Bahr is returned." "Victoriously, I hope," the lad lied glibly. "Victorious beyond aught that was ever known," replied Tsammani. "He sailed at sunset into the harbor, his company aboard 2 mighty Frankish ships, which are but the lesser part of the great spoil he brings." "Allah is great," was the Basha's glad welcome of this answer to those insidious promptings of his Sicilian wife. "Why does he not come in person with his news?" "His duty keeps him yet a while aboard, my lord," replied the Wazir, "but he has sent his Kaya Othmani here to tell the tale of it." "Thrice welcome be thou, Othmani." He beat his hands together, whereat slaves placed cushions for him upon the ground. He sat and beckoned Marzak to his side. "And now thy tale." And Othmani, standing forth, related how they had voyaged to distant England in the ship that Sakhr-el-Bahr had captured, through seas that no corsair yet had ever crossed, and how on their return they had engaged a Dutchman that was their superior in strength and numbers, how none the less Sakhr-el-Bahr had wrested victory by the help of Allah, his protector, how he had been dealt a wound that must have slain any, but one miraculously preserved for the greater glory of Islam, and of the surpassing. Wealth of the booty which at dawn tomorrow should be laid at Assad's feet for his division of it. Chapter 6. The Convert. That tale of Othmani's being born anon to Fenzli by her son was gall and wormwood to her jealous soul. Evil enough to know that Sakhr-el-Bahr was returned in spite of the fervent prayers for his foundering which she had addressed both to the God of her forefathers and to the God of her adoption, but that he should have returned in triumph, bringing with him heavy spoils that must exalt him further in the affection of Assad, and the esteem of the people was bitterness indeed. It left her mute and stricken, bereft even of the power to curse him. Anon, when her mind recovered from the shock, she turned it to the consideration of what at first had seemed a trivial detail in Othmani's tale, as reported by Marzak. It is most singularly odd that he should have undertaken that long voyage to England to wrest thence just those 2 captives. That being there, he should not have raided in true corsair fashion and packed his ship with slaves. Most singularly odd. They were alone behind the green lattices through which filtered the perfumes of the garden and the throbbing of a nightingale's voice laden with the tale of its love for the rose. Fenzli reclined upon a divan that was spread with silken Turkey carpets, and one of her gold-embroidered slippers had dropped from her henna-stained toes. Her lovely arms were raised to support her head, and she stared up at the lamp of many colors that hung from the fretted ceiling. Marzak paced the length of the chamber back and forth, and there was silence save for the soft swish of his slippers along the floor. "Well," she asked him impatiently at last, "does it not seem odd to thee?" "Odd, indeed, O my mother," the youth replied, coming to a halt before her. "And canst think of naught that was the cause of it?" "The cause of it?" quoth he, his lovely young face, so closely modeled upon her own, looking blank and vacant. "Aye, the cause of it," she cried impatiently. "Canst do naught but stare? Am I the mother of a fool? Wilt thou simper and gape and trifle away thy days whilst that dog-descended Frank tramples thee underfoot, using thee but as a stepping-stone to the power that should be thine own? And that be so, Marzak, I would thou hadst been strangled in my womb." He recoiled before the Italian fury of her, was dully resentful even, suspecting that in such words from a woman were she 20 times his mother, There was something dishonoring to his manhood. "What can I do?" he cried. "Dost ask me? Art thou not a man to think and act? I tell thee that misbegotten son of a Christian, and a Jew will trample thee in the dust. He is greedy as a locust, wily as a serpent, and ferocious as a panther. By Allah, I would I had never borne a son. Rather might men point at me the finger of scorn, and call me mother of the wind, than that I should have brought forth a man who knows not how to be a man. Show me the way," he cried. "Set me a task. Tell me what to do, and thou shalt not find me lacking. O my mother, until then spare me these insults, or I come no more to thee." At this threat, that strange woman heaved herself up from her soft couch. She ran to him and flung her arms about his neck, set her cheek against his own. Not 18 years in the Bosch's harem had stifled the European mother in her, the passionate Sicilian woman, fierce as a tiger in her maternal love. "Oh, my child, my lovely boy," she almost sobbed. "It is my fear for thee that makes me harsh. If I am angry, it is but my love that speaks. My rage for thee to see another come usurping the place beside thy father that should be thine. Ah, but we will prevail, sweet son of mine. I shall find a way to return that foreign offal to the dung heap whence it sprang. Trust me, O Marzak. S.H., thy father comes. Away, leave me alone with him." She was wise in that, for she knew that alone Assad was more easily controlled by her, since the pride was absent which must compel him to turn and rend her did she speak, so before others. Marzak vanished behind a screen of fretted sandalwood that masked one doorway even as Assad loomed in the other. He came forward smiling, his slender brown fingers combing his long beard, his white jalaba trailing behind him along the ground. "Thou hast heard, not a doubt, O Fenzili," said he. "Art thou answered enough?" She sank down again upon her cushions and idly considered herself in a steel mirror set in silver. "Answered?" she echoed lazily, with infinite scorn and a hint of rippling, contemptuous laughter running through the word. "Answered indeed. Sakr Bar risked the lives of 200 children of Islam, and a ship that being taken was become the property of the state upon a voyage to England that is no object but the capturing of 2 slaves. 2 slaves. When had his purpose been sincere, it might have been 200. "Ha! And is that all that thou hast heard?" he asked her, mocking in his turn. "All that signifies," she replied, still mirroring herself. "I heard as a matter of lesser import that on his return, meeting fortuitously a Frankish ship that chanced to be richly laden, he seized it in thy name." "Fortuitously, sayest thou? What else?" She lowered the mirror, and her bold, insolent eyes met his own quite fearlessly. "Thou wilt he not tell me that it was any part of his design when he went forth?" He frowned. His head sank slowly in thought. Observing the advantage gained, she thrust it home. "It was a lucky wind that blew that Dutchman into his path, and luckier still being so richly fraught that he may dazzle thine eyes with the sight of gold and gems, and so blind thee to the real purpose of his voyage." "Its real purpose?" he asked dully. What was its real purpose? She smiled a smile of infinite knowledge to hide her utter ignorance, her inability to supply even a reason that should wear an air of truth. "Dost ask me, O perspicuous Assad? Are not thine eyes as sharp, thy wits as keen at least as mine, that what is clear at me should be hidden from thee? Or hath this Sakr Bar bewitched thee with enchantments of Babel?" He strode to her and caught her wrist in a cruelly rough grip of his sinewy old hand. "His purpose, thou jade, pour out the foulness of thy mind. Speak." She sat up, flushed and defiant. "I will not speak," said she. "Thou wilt not? Now, by the head of Allah, dost dare to stand before my face and defy me, thy lord? I'll have thee whipped, Fenzili. I have been too tender of thee these many years, so tender that thou hast forgot the rods that await the disobedient wife. Speak then ere thy flesh is bruised, or speak thereafter at thy pleasure." "I will not," she repeated, "though I be flung to the hooks. Not another word will I say of Sakr Bar. Shall I unveil the truth to be spurned and scorned and dubbed a liar and the mother of lies?" Then abruptly changing, she fell to weeping. "O source of my life," she cried to him, "how cruelly unjust of me thou art." She was groveling now, a thing of supplest grace, her lovely arms entwining his knees. "When my love for thee drives me to utter what I see, I earn but thy anger, which is more than I can endure. I swooned beneath the weight of it. He flung her off impatiently. What a weariness is a woman's tongue, he cried, and stalked out again, convinced from past experiences that did he linger, he would be whelmed in a torrent of words. But her poison was shrewdly administered, and slowly did its work. It abode in his mind to torture him with the doubts that were its very essence. No reason, however well-founded, that she might have urged for Sakharel Bar's strange conduct could have been half so insidious as her suggestion that there was a reason. It gave him something vague and intangible to consider, something that he could not repel since it had no substance he could grapple with. Impatiently, he awaited the morning and the coming of Sakharel Bar himself, but he no longer awaited it with the ardent, wholehearted eagerness as a father awaiting the coming of a beloved son. Sakharel Bar himself paced the poop deck of the carrack and watched the lights perish one by one in the little town that straggled up the hillside before him. The moon came up and bathed in a white hard light, throwing sharp inky shadows of rustling date palm and spear-like minaret, and flinging shafts of silver athwart the peaceful bay. His wound was healed, and he was fully himself once more. 2 days ago he had come on deck for the first time since the fight with the Dutchman, and he had spent there the greater portion of the time since then. Once only had he visited his captives. He had risen from his couch to repair straight to the cabin in the poop where Rosamund was confined. He had found her pale and very wistful, but with her courage entirely unbroken. The Godolphins were a stiff-necked race, and Rosamund bore in her frail body the spirit of a man. She looked up when he entered, started a little in surprise to see him at last, for it was the first time he stood before her since he had carried her off from Arwenack some 4 weeks ago. Then she had averted her eyes and sat there, elbows on the table, as if carved of wood, as if blind to his presence and deaf to his words, to the expressions of regret. And they were sincere, for already he repented of his unpremeditated act so far as she was concerned. She returned no slightest answer, gave no sign indeed that she heard a word of it. Baffled, he stood gnawing his lip a moment, and gradually, unreasonably perhaps, anger welled up from his heart. He turned and went out again. Next he had visited his brother, to consider in silence a moment the haggard, wild-eyed, unshorn wretch who shrank and cowered before him in the consciousness of guilt. At last he returned to the deck, and there, as I have said, he spent the greater portion of the last 3 days of that strange voyage, reclining for the most part in the sun, and gathering strength from its ardor. Tonight, as he paced under the moon, a stealthy shadow crept up the companion to call him gently by his English name. Sir Oliver. He started as if a ghost had suddenly leapt up to greet him. It was Jasper Lee who hailed him thus. "Come up," he said, and when the fellow stood before him on the poop, "I have told you already that here is no Sir Oliver. I am Oliver Rees or Sakharel Bar, as you please, one of the faithful of the Prophet's house. And now what is your will?" "Have I not served you faithfully and well?" quoth Captain Lee. "Who has denied it?" "None. But neither has any acknowledged it. When you lay wounded below, it had been an easy thing for me to played the traitor. I might sailed these ships into the mouth of Tagus. I might so by God. ULD had been carved in pieces on the spot," said Sakharel Bar. "I might have hugged the land and run the risk of capture, and then claimed my liberation from captivity, and found yourself back on the galleys of His Catholic Majesty. But there, I grant that you have dealt loyally by me. You have kept your part of the bond. I shall keep mine, never doubt it. I do not, but your part of the bond was to send me home again. Well, the hell of it is that I know not where to find a home. I know not where home may be after all these years. If ye send me forth, I shall become a wanderer of no account. What else am I to do with you? Faith, now I am as full weary of Christians in Christendom as you was yourself when the Muslims took the galley on which you toiled. I am a man of parts, Sir O.L. Sakharel Bar. No better navigator ever sailed a ship from an English port, and I seen a mortal fighting and know the art of it upon the sea. Can ye make naught of me here? You will become a renegade like me?" His tone was bitter. "I have been thinking that renegade is a word that depends upon which side you're on. I prefer to say that I've a wish to be converted to the faith of Mahound. Converted to the faith of piracy and plunder and robbery upon the seas is what you mean," said Sakharel Bar. "Nay, now, to that I should need no converting, for all that I were afore," Captain Lee admitted frankly. I ask but to sail under another flag than the Jolly Roger. You'll need to abjure strong drink, said Sakharel Bar. There be compensations, said Master Lee. Sakharel Bar considered. The rogue's appeal smote a responsive chord in his heart. It would be good to have a man of his own race beside him, even though it were but such a rascal as this. Be it as you will, he said at last. You deserve to be hanged in spite of what promises I made you. But no matter for that. So that you become a Muslim, I will take you to serve beside me, one of my own lieutenants to begin with. And so long as you are loyal to me, Jasper, all will be well. But at the first sign of faithlessness, a rope and a yardarm, my friend, and an airy dance into hell for you. The rascally skipper stooped in his emotion, caught up Sakharel Bar's hand, and bore it to his lips. It is agreed, he said. Ye have shown me mercy, who have little deserved it from you. Never fear for my loyalty. My life belongs to you, and worthless thing though it may be, ye may do with it as ye please. Despite himself, Sakharel Bar tightened his grip upon the rogue's hand, and Jasper shuffled off and down the companion again, touched to the heart for once in his rough villainous life by a clemency that he knew to be undeserved, but which he swore should be deserved ere all was done. Chapter 7. Marzak Ben Assad. It took no less than 40 camels to convey the cargo of that Dutch argosy from the mole to the Kasbah, and the procession, carefully marshaled by Sakharel Bar, who knew the value of such pageants to impress the mob, was such as never yet had been seen in the narrow streets of Algiers upon return of any corsair. It was full worthy of the greatest Muslim conqueror that sailed the seas, of one who, not content to keep to the tideless Mediterranean as had hitherto been a rule of his kind, had ventured forth upon the wider ocean. Ahead marched 100 of his rovers in their short caftans of every conceivable color, their waists swathed in gaudy scarves, some which supported a very arsenal of assorted cutlery. Many wore body armor of mail, and the gleaming spike of a casque thrust up above their turbans. After them, dejected and in chains, came the 50 prisoners taken aboard the Dutchman, urged along by the whips of the corsairs who flanked them. Then marched another regiment of corsairs, and after these a long line of stately, sneering camels, shuffling cumbrously along and led by shouting Sahrawis. After them followed yet more corsairs, and then mounted on a white Arab jennet, his head swayed in a turban of cloth of gold, came Sakharel Bar. In the narrower streets, with their white and yellow wash houses, which presented blank windowless walls broken here and there by no more than a slit to admit light and air, the spectators huddled themselves fearfully into doorways to avoid being crushed to death by the camels, whose burdens bulging on either side entirely filled those narrow ways. But the more open spaces, such as the strand on either side of the mole, the square before the Sak, and the approaches of Assad's fortress, were thronged with a motley roaring crowd. There were stately Moors in flowing robes cheeked by jowl with half-naked blacks from the Sus and the Dra, lean, enduring Arabs in their spotless white jalabas rubbed shoulders with Berbers from the highlands in black camel hair cloaks. There were Levantine Turks and Jewish refugees from Spain ostentatiously dressed in European garments, tolerated there because bound and more by ties of common suffering and common exile from that land that once had been their own. Under the glaring African sun, this amazing crowd stood assembled to welcome Sakharel Bar, and welcome him it did, with such vocal thunder that an echo of it from the mole reached the very Kasbah on a hilltop to herald his approach. By the time, however, that he reached the fortress, his procession had dwindled by more than half. At the Sak his forces had divided, and his corsairs, headed by Othmani, had marched the captives away to the Banyo or Banyad, as my Lord Henry calls it, whilst the camels had continued up the hill. Under the great gateway of the Kasbah they padded into the vast courtyard to be ranged along two sides of it by their Sahrawi drivers, and there brought clumsily to their knees. After them followed but some 20 corsairs as a guard of honor to their leader. They took their stand upon either side of the gateway after profoundly salaaming to Asad ad-Din. The Basha sat in the shade of an awning enthroned upon a divan, attended by his wazir Tsammani and by Marzak, and guarded by a half-dozen janissaries, whose sable garments made an effective background to the green and gold as jeweled robes. In his white turban glowed an emerald crescent. The Basha's countenance was dark and brooding as he watched the advent of that line of burdened camels. His thoughts were still laboring with the doubt of Sakharel Bar, which Fenzilia's crafty speech and craftier reticence had planted in them. But at sight of the corsair leader himself, his countenance cleared suddenly, his eyes sparkled, and he rose to his feet to welcome him as a father might welcome a son who had been through perils on a service dear to both. Sakr el-Bahr entered the courtyard on foot, having dismounted at the gate, tall and imposing, with his head high and his forked beard thrusting forward. He stalked with great dignity to the foot of the divan, followed by Ali and a mahogany-faced fellow, turbaned and red-bearded, in whom it needed more than a glance to recognize the rascally Jasper Lee, now in all the panoply of your complete renegado. Sakr el-Bahr went down upon his knees and prostrated himself solemnly before his prince. "The blessing of Allah and his peace upon thee, my lord," was his greeting, and Asad, stooping to lift that splendid figure in his arms, gave him a welcome that caused the spying Fenzli to clench her teeth behind the fretted lattice that concealed her. "The praise to Allah and to our Lord Muhammad that thou art returned and in health, my son. Already hath my old heart been gladdened by the news of thy victories in the service of the faith." Then followed the display of all those riches wrested from the Dutch, and greatly though Asad's expectations had been fed already by Othmani, the sight now spread before his eyes by far exceeded all those expectations. In the end, all was dismissed to the treasury, and Samani was bid to go cast up the account of it and mark the share that fell to the portion of those concerned. For in these ventures all were partners, from the Basha himself, who represented the state, down to the meanest corsair who had manned the victorious vessels of the faith, and each had his share of the booty, greater or less according to his rank, 1/20 of the total falling to Sakr el-Bahr himself. In the courtyard were left none but Asad, Marzak, and Janissaries, and Sakr el-Bahr with Ali and Jasper. It was then that Sakr el-Bahr presented his new officer to the Bahal as one upon whom the grace of Allah had descended, a great fighter and a skilled seaman, who had offered up his talents and his life to the service of Islam, who had been accepted by Sakr el-Bahr, and stood now before Asad to be confirmed in his office. Marzak interposed petulantly to exclaim that already were there too many erstwhile Nasrani dogs in the ranks of the soldiers of the faith, and that it was unwise to increase their number and presumptuous in Sakr el-Bahr to take so much upon himself. Sakr el-Bahr measured him with an eye in which scorn and surprise were nicely blended. "Dost say that it is presumptuous to win a convert to banner of our Lord Muhammad?" quoth he. "Go read the most perspicuous book, and see what is there enjoined as a duty upon every true believer. And bethink thee, O son of Asad, that when thou dost in thy little wisdom cast scorn upon those whom Allah has blessed and led from a night wherein they dwelt into the bright noontide of faith, thou dost cast scorn upon me and upon thine own mother, which is a little matter, and thou dost blaspheme the blessed name of Allah, which is to tread the ways that lead unto the pit." Angry but defeated and silenced, Marzak fell back a step and stood biting his lip and glowering upon the corsair, what time Asad nodded his head and smiled approval. "Verily art thou full learned in the true belief, Sakr el-Bahr," he said. "Thou art the very father of wisdom as of valor." And thereupon he gave welcome to Master Lee, whom he hailed to the ranks of the faithful under the designation of Jasper Rees. That done, the renegade and Ali were both dismissed, as were also the Janissaries, who, quitting their position behind Asad, went to take their stand on guard at the gateway. Then the Basha beat his hands together, and to the slaves who came in answer to his summons, he gave orders to set food, and he bade Sakr el-Bahr to come sit beside him on the divan. Water was brought that they might wash. That done, the slaves placed before them a savory stew of meat and eggs with olives, limes, and spices. Asad broke bread with a reverently pronounced Bismillah and dipped his fingers into the earthenware bowl, leading the way for Sakr el-Bahr and Marzak, and as they ate he invited the corsair himself to recite the tale of his adventure. When he had done so, and again Asad had praised him in high and loving terms, Marzak set him a question. "Was it to obtain just these 2 English slaves that thou didst undertake this perilous voyage to that distant land?" "That was but a part of my design," was the calm reply. "I went to rove the seas in the Prophet's service, as the result of my voyage gives proof." "Thou didst not know that this Dutch argosy would cross thy path," said Marzak, in the very words his mother had prompted him. "Did I not?" quoth Sakr el-Bahr, and he smiled confidently, so confidently that Asad scarce needed to hear the words that so cunningly gave a lie to the innuendo. "Had I no trust in Allah, the All-Wise, the All-Knowing? Well answered by the Quran." Asad approved him heartily, the more heartily since it rebutted insinuations which he desired above all to hear rebutted. But Marzak did not yet own himself defeated. He had been soundly schooled by his guileful Sicilian mother. "Yet there is something in all this I do not understand," he murmured, with false gentleness. "All things are possible to Allah," said Sakr Bar, in tones of incredulity, as if he suggested, not without a suspicion of irony, that it was incredible there should be anything in all the world that could elude the penetration of Marzak. The youth bowed to him in acknowledgment. "Tell me, O mighty Sakr Bar," he begged, "how it came to pass that having reached those distant shores thou wert content to take thence but 2 poor slaves, since of thy followers and the favor of the all-seeing thou might easily have taken 50 times that number." And he looked ingenuously into the corsair's swarthy, rugged face, whilst Asad frowned thoughtfully, for the thought was one that had occurred to him already. It became necessary that Sakr Bar should lie to clear himself. Here no high-sounding phrase of faith would answer. An explanation was unavoidable, and he was conscious that he could not afford one that did not go a little lame. "Why, as to that," said he, "these prisoners were arrested from the first house upon which we came, and their capture occasioned some alarm. Moreover, it was night time when we landed, and I dared not adventure the lives of my followers by taking them further from the ship and attacking a village which might have risen to cut off our good retreat." The frown remained stamped upon the brow of Asad, as Marzak slyly observed. "Yet Othmani," said he, "urged you to fall upon a slumbering village all unconscious of thy presence, and thou didst refuse." Asad looked up sharply at that, and Sakr Bar realized with tightening about the heart something of the undercurrents at work against him, and all the pains that had been taken to glean information that might be used to his undoing. "Is it so?" demanded Asad, looking from his son to his lieutenant with that lowering look that rendered his face evil and cruel. Sakr Bar took a high tone. He met Asad's glance with an eye of challenge. "And if it were so, my lord," he demanded, "I ask thee, is it so?" "Aye, but knowing thy wisdom, I disbelieve my ears," said Sakr Bar. "Shall it signify what Othmani may have said? Do I take my orders, or am I to be guided by Othmani? If so, best set Othmani in my place. Give him command and the responsibility for the lives of the faithful who fight beside him." He ended with an indignant snort. "Thou art overquick to anger," Asad reproved him, scowling still. "And by the head of Allah, who will deny my right to it, am I to conduct such an enterprise as this from which I am returned laden with spoils that might well be the fruits of a year's raiding, to be questioned by a beardless stripling as to why I was not guided by Othmani?" He heaved himself up and stood towering there in the intensity of a passion that was entirely simulated. He must bluster here, and crush down suspicion with whirling periods and broad, fierce gesture. "To what should Othmani have guided me?" he demanded scornfully. "Could he have guided me to more than I have this day laid at thy feet? What I have done speaks eloquently with its own voice. What he would have had me do might well have ended in disaster. Had it so ended, would the blame of it have fallen upon Othmani? Nay, by Allah, but upon me. And upon me rests in the credit, and let none dare question it without better cause." Now these were daring words to address to the tyrant Asad, and still more daring was the tone, the light hard eyes aflash, and the sweeping gestures of contempt with which they were delivered. But of his ascendancy over the Basha, there was no doubt, and here now was proof of it. Asad almost cowered before his fury. The scowl faded from his face to be replaced by an expression of dismay. "Nay, nay, Sakr Bar this tone," he cried. Sakr Bar, having slammed the door of conciliation in the face of the Basha, now opened it again. He became instantly submissive. "Forgive it," he said. "Blame the devotion of thy servant to thee, and to the faith he serves with little wreck to life. In this very expedition was I wounded nigh unto death. The livid scar of it is a dumb witness to my zeal. Where are thy scars, Marzak?" Marzak quailed before the sudden blaze of that question, and Sakr Bar laughed softly in contempt. "Sit," Asad bade him. "I have been less than just." "Thou art the very fount and spring of justice, O my lord, as this thine admission proves," protested the corsair. He sat down again, folding his legs under him. "I will confess to you that being come so near to England in that cruise of mine, I determined to land, and seize one who some years ago did injure me, and between whom and me there was a score to settle. I exceeded my intentions in that I carried off 2 prisoners instead of 1. These prisoners, he ran on, judging that the moment of reaction in Assad's mind was entirely favorable to preferment of the request he had to make, are not in the banyo with the others. They are still confined aboard the carrack I seized. And why is this, quoth Assad, but without suspicion now? Because, my lord, I have a boon to ask in some reward for the service I rendered. Ask it, my son. Give me leave to keep these captives for myself. Assad considered him, frowning again slightly. Despite himself, despite his affection for Sakr-el-Bahr, and his desire to soothe him now that rankling poison of Fenzilia's infusing was at work again in his mind. My leave thou hast, said he, but not the laws, and the law runs that no corsair shall subtract so much as the value of an asper from his booty until the division has been made and his own share allotted him, was a grave answer. The law, quoth Sakr-el-Bahr, but thou art the law, exalted lord. Not so, my son. The law is above the Basha, who must himself conform to it, so that he be just and worthy of his high office. And the law I have recited thee applies even should the corsair raider be the Basha himself. These slaves of thine must forthwith be sent to the banyo, to join the others, that tomorrow all may be sold in the sock. See it done, Sakr-el-Bahr. The corsair would have renewed his pleadings, but that as I caught the eager white face of Marzak and the gleaming expectant eyes, looking so hopefully for his ruin, he checked, and bowed his head with an assumption of indifference. Name thou their price then, and forthwith will I pay it into thy treasury. But Assad shook his head. It is not for me to name their price, but for the buyers, he replied. I might set the price too high, and that were unjust to thee, or too low, and that were unjust to others who would acquire them. Deliver them over to the banyo. It shall be done, said Sakr-el-Bahr, daring to insist no further and dissembling his chagrin. Very soon thereafter he departed upon that errand, giving orders, however, that Rosamund and Lionel should be kept apart from the other prisoners until the hour of the sale on the morrow, when perforce they must take their place with the rest. Marzak lingered with his father after Oliver had taken his leave, and presently they were joined there in the courtyard by Fenzili. This woman who had brought, said many, the Frankish ways of Shaitan into Algiers. Chapter 8. Mother and son. Early on the morrow, so early that scarcely she had been recited, came Biscayne el Bork to the Basha. He had just landed from a galley which had come upon a Spanish fishing boat, aboard of which there was a young Morisco who was being conducted overseas to Algiers. The news of which the fellow was the bearer was of such urgency that for 20 hours without intermission the slaves had toiled at the oars of Biscayne's vessel, the capitan of his fleet, to bring her swiftly home. The Morisco had a cousin, a new Christian like himself, and like himself, it would appear, still a Muslim at heart, who was employed in the Spanish treasury at Malaga. This man had knowledge that a galley was fitting out for sea to convey to Naples the gold destined for the pay of the Spanish troops in garrison there. Through parsimony, this treasure galley was to be afforded no escort, but was under orders to hug the coast of Europe, where she should be safe from all piratical surprise. It was judged that she would be ready to put to sea in a week, and the Morisco had set out at once to bring word of it to his Algerine brethren, that they might intercept and capture her. Assad thanked the young Morisco for his news, bade him be housed and cared for, and promised him a handsome share of the plunder should the treasure galley be captured. That done, he sent for Sakr-el-Bahr, whilst Marzak, who had been present at the interview, went with the tale of it to his mother, and beheld her fling into a passion when he added that it was Sakr-el-Bahr had been summoned that he might be entrusted with this fresh expedition, thus proving that all her crafty innuendos and insistent warnings had been so much wasted labor. With Marzak following at her heels, she swept like a fury into the darkened room where Assad took his ease. "What is this I hear, O my lord?" she cried, in tone and manner more the European shrew than the submissive Eastern slave. "Is Sakr-el-Bahr go upon this expedition against the treasure galley of Spain?" Reclining on his divan, he looked her up and down with a languid eye. "Dost know of any better fitted to succeed?" quoth he. "I know of one whom it is my lord's duty to prefer to that foreign adventurer, one who is entirely faithful and entirely to be trusted, one who does not attempt to retain for himself a portion of the booty garnered in the name of Islam." "Bah!" said Assad. "Wilt thou talk forever those two slaves? And who may be this paragon of thine?" Marzak, she answered fiercely, flinging out an arm to drag forward her son. Is he to waste his youth here in softness and idleness? But yesternight that ribald mocked him with his lack of scars. Shall he take scars in the orchard of the Casbah here? Is he to be content with those that come from the scratch of a bramble? Or is he to learn to be a fighter and leader of the children of the faith, that himself he may follow in the path his father trod? Whether he so follows, said Asad, is as the Sultan of Istanbul, the sublime portal, shall decree. We are but his vicegerents here. But shall the grand Sultan appoint him to succeed thee if thou hast not equipped him so to do? I cry shame on thee, O father of Marzak, for that thou art lacking due pride in thine own son. May Allah give me patience with thee. Have I not said that he is still over young? At his age thyself thou wert upon the seas, serving with the great Ochiali. At his age I was, by the favor of Allah, taller and stronger than is he. I cherish him too dearly to let him go forth, and perchance be lost to me before his strength is full grown. Look at him, she commanded. He is a man, Asad, and such a son as another might take pride in. Is it not time he girt a scimitar about his waist, and trod the poop of one of thy galleys? Indeed, indeed, O my father, begged Marzak himself. What? Barked the old Moor. And is it so? And wouldst thou go forth then against the Spaniard? What knowledge hast thou that shall equip thee for such a task? What can his knowledge be, since his father has never been concerned to school him? Returned Fenzeli. Dost thou sneer at shortcomings that are the natural fruits of thine own omissions? I will be patient with thee, said Asad, showing every sign of losing patience. I will ask thee only if in thy judgment he is in case to win a victory for Islam. Answer me straightly now. Straightly I answer thee that he is not, and as straightly I tell thee that it is full time he were. Thy duty is to let him go upon this expedition, that he may learn the trade that lies before him. Asad considered a moment. Then, be it so, he answered slowly. Shalt set forth, then, with Sakr el-Bahr, my son. With Sakr el-Bahr? Cried Fenzilk aghast. I could find him no better preceptor. Shall thy son go forth as the servant of another? As the pupil, Asad amended. What else? Were I a man, O fountain of my soul, said she, and had I a son, none but myself should be his preceptor. I should so mold and fashion him, that he should be another me. That, O my dear lord, is thy duty to Marzak. Entrust not his training to another, and to one whom despite thy love for him I cannot trust. Go forth thyself upon this expedition, with Marzak here for thy Kaya. Asad frowned. I grow too old, he said. I have not been upon the seas these 2 years past. Who can say that I may not have lost the art of victory? No, no. He shook his head, and his face grew overcast and softened by wistfulness. Sakr el-Bahr commands this time, and if Marzak goes, he goes with him. My lord, she began, then checked. A Nubian had entered to announce that Sakr el-Bahr was come and was awaiting the orders of his lord in the courtyard. Asad rose instantly, and for all that Fenzeli, greatly daring as ever, would still have detained him, he shook her off impatiently and went out. She watched his departure with anger in those dark, lovely eyes of hers, an anger that went near to filming them in tears, and after he had passed out into the glaring sunshine beyond the door, a silence dwelt in the cool, darkened chamber, a silence disturbed only by distant trills of silvery laughter from the lesser women of the Basha's house. The sound jarred her taut nerves. She moved with an oath and beat her hands together. To answer her came a negress, lithe and muscular as a wrestler and naked to the waist. The slave ring in her ear was of massive gold. Bid them make an end of that screeching. She snapped to vent some of her fierce petulance. Tell them I will have the rods to them if they again disturb me. The negress went out, and silence followed, for those other lesser ladies of the Basha's harem were more obedient to the commands of Fenzeli than to those of the Basha himself. Then she drew her son to the fretted lattice, commanding the courtyard, a screen from behind which they could see and hear all that passed out yonder. Asad was speaking, informing Sakr el-Bahr what he had learnt, and what there was to do. How soon canst thou put to sea again? He ended. As soon as the service of Allah and thyself require, was the prompt answer. It is well, my son. Asad laid a hand, affectionately upon the corsair's shoulder, entirely conquered by this readiness. Best set out at sunrise tomorrow. Thou wilt need so long to make thee ready for the sea. Then by thy leave I go forthwith to give orders to prepare, replied Sakr el-Bahr, for all that he was a little troubled in his mind by this need to depart again so soon. What galleys shalt thou take? To capture one galley of Spain? My own galleass no more. She will be full equal to such an enterprise, and I shall be the better able, then, to lurk and take cover, a thing which might well prove impossible with a fleet. Aye, thou art wise in thy daring, Asad approved him. May Allah prosper thee upon the voyage. Have I thy leave to go? A moment yet. There is my son Marzak. He is approaching manhood, and it is time he entered the service of Allah and the state. It is my desire that he sail as thy lieutenant on this voyage, and that thou be his preceptor even as I was thine of old. Now here was something that pleased Sakr el-Bahr as little as it pleased Marzak. Knowing the bitter enmity borne him by the son of Fenzli, he had every cause to fear trouble if this project of Asad's were realized. As I was thine of old, he answered with crafty wistfulness. Wilt thou not put to sea with us tomorrow, O Asad? There is none like thee in all Islam, and what a joy were it not to stand beside thee on the prow as of old when we grappled with the Spaniard. Asad considered him. Dost thou too urge this? Quoth he. Have others urged it? The man's sharp wits, rendered still sharper by his sufferings, were cutting deeply and swiftly into this matter. They did well, but none could have urged it more fervently than I, for none knows so well as I the joy of battle against the infidel under thy command, and the glory of prevailing in thy sight. Come, then, my lord, upon this enterprise, and be thyself thine own son's preceptor, since 'tis the highest honor thou canst bestow upon him. Thoughtfully Asad stroked his long white beard, his eagle eyes growing narrow. Thou temptest me, by Allah. Let me do more. Nay, more thou canst not. I am old and worn, and I am needed here. Shall an old lion hunt a young gazelle? Peace, peace. The sun has set upon my fighting day. Let the brood of fighters I have raised up keep, that which my arm conquered, and maintain my name, and the glory of the faith upon the seas. He leaned upon Sakr el-Bahr's shoulder and sighed, his eyes wistfully dreamy. It were a fond adventure, in good truth. But no, I am resolved. Go thou and take Marzak with thee, and bring him safely home again. I should not return myself else, was the answer. But my trust is in the all-knowing. Upon that he departed, dissembling his profound vexation both at the voyage and the company, and went to bid Othmani make ready his great galleass, equipping it with carronades, 300 slaves to row it, and 300 fighting men. Asad ad-Din returned to that darkened room in the Kasbah overlooking the courtyard, where Fenzli and Marzak still lingered. He went to tell them that in compliance with the desires of both Marzak should go forth to prove himself upon this expedition. But where he had left impatience, he found thinly veiled wrath. "O son that warms me," Fenzli greeted him, and from long experience he knew that the more endearing were her epithets, the more vicious was her mood. "Do then my counsels weigh as naught with thee? Are they but as the dust upon thy shoes?" "Less," said Asad, provoked out of his habitual indulgence of her licenses of speech. "That is the truth indeed," she cried, bowing her head, whilst behind her the handsome face of her son was overcast. "It is," Asad agreed. "At dawn, Marzak, thou settest forth upon the galleass of Sakr el-Bahr to take the seas under his tutelage and to emulate the skill and valor that have rendered him the stoutest bulwark of Islam, the very javelin of Allah." But Marzak felt that in this matter his mother was to be supported, whilst his detestation of this adventurer who threatened to usurp the place that should rightly be his own spurred him to mad lengths of daring. "When I take the seas with that dog descended Nazrani," he answered hoarsely, "he shall be where rightly he belongs, at the rower's bench." "How?" It was a bellow of rage. Upon the word Asad swung to confront his son, and his face, suddenly inflamed, was so cruel and evil in its expression that it terrified that intriguing pair. "By the beard of the Prophet, what words are these to me?" He advanced upon Marzak until Fenzli in sudden terror stepped between and faced him, like a lioness springing to defend her cub. But the Basha, enraged now by this want of submission in his son, enraged both against that son and the mother who he knew had prompted him, caught her in his sinewy old hands and flung her furiously aside, so that she stumbled and fell in a panting heap amid the cushions of her divan. "The curse of Allah upon thee!" he screamed, and Marzak recoiled before him. has this presumptuous hellcat, who bore thee taught thee to stand before my face, to tell me what thou wilt and wilt not do? By the Koran, too long have I endured her evil foreign ways, and now it seems she has taught thee how to tread them after her, and how to beard thy very father. Tomorrow thou'lt take the sea with Sakr Obar. I have said it. Another word, and thou'lt go aboard his galleass, even as thou said should be the case with him, at the rower's bench, to learn submission under the slave master's whip. Terrified, Marzak stood numb and silent, scarcely daring to draw breath. Never in all his life had he seen his father in a rage so royal. Yet it seemed to inspire no fear in Fensley, that congenital shrew whose tongue not even the threat of rods or hooks could silence. I shall pray Allah to restore sight to thy soul, O father of Marzak, she panted, to teach thee to discriminate between those that love thee and the self-seekers that abuse thy trust. How? He roared at her. Art not yet done? Nor ever shall be until I am lain dumb in death, for having counseled thee out of my great love, O light of these poor eyes of mine. Maintain this tone, he said with concentrated anger, and that will soon befall. I care not, so that the sleek mask be plucked from the face of that dog-descended Sakr Obar. May Allah break his bones. What are those slaves of his? Those two from England, O Assad. I am told that one is a woman, tall and of that white beauty, which is the gift of Eblis to these northerners. What is his purpose with her? That he would not show her in the souk as the law prescribes, but come slinking here to beg thee set aside the law for him. Ha! I talk in vain. I have shown thee graver things to prove his vile disloyalty, and yet thou wilt fawn upon him whilst thy fangs are bared to thine own son. He advanced upon her, stooped, caught her by the wrist, and heaved her up. His face showed gray under its deep tan. His aspect terrified her at last, and made an end to her reckless forward courage. He raised his voice to call, Yantah, Ayub! She gasped, livid in her turn with sudden terror. My lord, she whimpered. Stream of my life, be not angry. What wilt thou do? He smiled evilly. Do, he growled. What I should have done 10 years ago and more. We'll have the rods to thee. And again he called more insistently, Ayub! My lord! She gasped in shuddering horror now that at last she found him set upon the thing to which so often she had dared him. Pity! She groveled and embraced his knees. In the name of the pitying, the pitiful, be merciful upon the excesses to which my love for thee may have driven this poor tongue of mine. O my sweet lord, O father of Marzak! Her distress, her beauty, and perhaps, more than either, her unusual humility and submission may have moved him. For even as at that moment Ayub, the sleek and portly eunuch, who was her wazer and chamberlain, loomed in the inner doorway, salaaming, he vanished again upon the instant, dismissed by a peremptory wave of the Basha's hand. Assad looked down upon her, sneering. That attitude becomes thee best, he said. Continue in future. Contemptuously he shook himself free of her grasp, turned and stalked majestically out, wearing his anger like a royal mantle, and leaving behind him two terror-shaken beings, who felt as if they had looked over the very edge of death. There was a long silence between them. Then at long length Fensley rose and crossed to the meshabaya, the lattice window box. She opened it and took from one of its shelves an earthenware jar, placed there so as to receive the slightest breeze. From it, she poured water into a little cup and drank greedily. That she could perform this menial service for herself when a mere clapping of hands would have brought slaves to minister to her need betrayed something of her disordered state of mind. She slammed the inner lattice and turned to Marzak. And now, quoth she. Now, said the lad. Aye, what now? What are we to do? Are we to lie crushed under his rage until we are ruined indeed? He is bewitched. That jackal has enchanted him, so that he must deem well done all that is done by him. Allah guide us here, Marzak, or thou wilt be trampled into dust by Sakr Obar. Marzak hung his head. Slowly he moved to the divan and flung himself down upon its pillows. There he lay prone, his hands cupping his chin, his heels in the air. What can I do? He asked at last. That is what I most desire to know. Something must be done, and soon. May his bones rot. If he lives, thou art destroyed. Aye, said Marzak, with sudden vigor and significance. If he lives. And he sat up, Whilst we plan and plot, and our plans and plots come to naught save to provoke the anger of my father, we might be better employed in taking the shorter way." She stood in the middle of the chamber, pondering him with gloomy eyes. "I too have thought of that," said she. "I could hire me men to do the thing for a handful of gold. But the risk of it, where would be the risk once he is dead? He might pull us down with him, and then what would our profit be in his death? Thy father would avenge him terribly. If it were craftily done, we should not be discovered." "Not be discovered?" she echoed, and laughed without mirth. "How young and blind thou art, O Marzak! We should be the first to be suspected. I have made no secret of my hate of him, and the people do not love me. They would urge thy father to do justice, even were he himself averse to it, which I will not credit would be the case. This Sakr Bar, may Allah wither him, is a god in their eyes. Bethink thee of the welcome given him. What Basha returning in triumph was ever greeted by the like? These victories that fortune has vouchsafed him have made them account him divinely favored and protected. I tell thee, Marzak, that did thy father die tomorrow, Sakr Bar will be proclaimed Basha of Algiers in his stead. And woe betide us then. And Asad ed-Din grows old. True, he does not go forth to fight. He clings to life and may last long. But if he should not, and if Sakr Bar should still walk the earth when thy father's destiny is fulfilled, I dare not think what then will be thy fate and mine." "May his grave be defiled," growled Marzak. "His grave," said she. "The difficulty is to dig it for him, without hurt to ourselves. Shaitan protects the dog." "May he make his bed in hell," said Marzak. "To curse him will not help us. Up, Marzak, and consider how the thing is to be done." Marzak came to his feet, nimble and supple as a greyhound. "Listen now," he said, "since I must go this voyage with him, perchance upon the seas on some dark night opportunity may serve me." "Wait, let me consider it. Allah guide me to find some way." She beat her hands together and bade the slave girl who answered her to summon her Wazer Ayub and bid a litter be prepared for her. "Will the Sak, O Marzak, and see these slaves of his. Who knows but that something may be done by means of them? Guile will serve us better than mere strength against that misbegotten son of shame." "May his house be destroyed," said Marzak.